Hello, welcome to 3.3. Our syllabus objective today is describe the structure and function of the 5 basic senses: touch, hearing, vision, taste, and smell. But there's another one that I should add to the syllabus objective, honestly, and that is proprioception, because that is a huge one that affects us as massage therapists when working on a client. All right, you have 7 or 8 senses, depending on what scientific group you are listening to as a leading expert. But for sure, today we are going to talk about 6 of them. All right, there are 5 basic human senses: touch, sight, hearing, smell, and taste. The sensing organs associated with each sense send information to the brain to help us understand and perceive the world around us. However, there are in fact other human senses in addition to the 5 basic that you could not live without. These lesser known senses include spatial awareness and balance, all right, which is why we're going to talk about proprioception. As a side note, an amazing modality to get interested in is proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation. All right, PNF for short. Keep that in the back of your brain. If you have any questions about proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation, please shoot me an email and I will try to include some information on that because it's one of my favorite modalities. All right, touch. We're going to start with touch because touch is thought to be the first sense that humans actually develop. Touch consists of several distinct sensations communicated to the brain through specialized neurons in the skin. Pressure, temperature, light, touch, vibration, pain, and other sensations are all part of the touch sense and are all attributed to different receptors in the skin. All right, you guys have another assignment this week that's going to talk about the importance of touch. It is absolutely amazing. If you don't have it now, you will have it when we talk about the integumentary system and the importance of touch. Now, going to that assignment and more fact about touch. Touch is not just a sense used to interact with the world, to sense if something's hot or prickly or whatever. It also is very important to a human's well-being. Not only can you convey compassion from one human to another, this is how you send and trigger neurotransmitters like oxytocin to start being developed. If you hug someone for more than 20 seconds, oxytocin starts being created. In failure to thrive cases, infants have been known to actually pass away because of the inability to receive enough touch. There's a horrifying study that was done in Eastern European orphanages. I'm pretty sure the Miami Touch Research Institute has some information on that one, as well as a few others. But touch is extremely, extremely important in the development, both social and emotionally, for human beings. Sight or perceiving things through the eyes is a super complex process that absolutely boggles my mind. So do cameras. Cameras are basically inanimate eyes, and it blows my mind. Like, I could never be an ophthalmologist or an eye doctor of any sort because I am confounded and amazed by the mystery of the eyes. All right, so first we have light reflecting off of an object to the eye, and then the transparent outer layer of the eye, which is called the cornea, bends the light that passes through the whole of the pupil. Okay. The iris, which is the colored part of the eye, works like the shutter of a camera. It retracts to shut out light, or it opens wider to let out more light. All right. So it contracts or it dilates depending as needed. Then the cornea focuses most of the light. And then when a light then passes through the lens, which continues to focus it more. All right. Once the lens gets it, it bends the light even more and focuses it on the retina, which is full of nerve cells. These cells are shaped like rods and cones and are named for their shapes. Cones translate light into colors, central vision, and details. The rods translate light into peripheral vision, right, the vision on the sides, and motion. Rods also give humans vision when there is limited light available, like at night. The information translated from the light is sent as electrical impulses to the brain through the optic nerve. So in this top image here, we have the light coming in through the eye, and then there's this little blacked out area in the back here on the retina, and it is showing you what it looks like, the layers in here. And usually these are in triplicate, not a single layer like this. This is a microscope image of what's going on in there with all of the rods and cones. These are all individualized nerve cells collecting those light impulses, getting ready to convert the light into electrical impulses, and then it is sending the electrical impulses to the brain. Now, people who don't have sight compensate oftentimes with enhanced hearing, taste, touch, and smell, right? Their memory and language skills may also be better than those born with sight as well. Even in the case of being profoundly blind, the brain will rewire itself in a manner to use the information at its disposal so that it can interact with the environment in a more effective manner. So there's something really cool that I want to talk about in terms of artistry. There are blind artists who deal with things like painting and crafting, things that are visual arts. Now, this seems kind of weird when you hear that, but only 10% of people are profoundly blind, or actually 100%, they cannot see anything at all, okay? Only 10% of people. The other 90% cannot see well enough to do things like drive or function, but they still can perceive either colors, vague shapes, or at least light coming in through the eye, even though they can't make out any shapes. However, in the case of Esraf Armagan, he's a blind Turkish painter who sees through his fingertips. He was born completely blind. I believe there's also another Russian painter who was born without eyes that does something similar. And he has taught himself to draw not only with colors and shading, but full dimensions and perspective. I have included this picture for you guys because it is crazy to me. You can see the tiny houses off in the far back distance. That's perspective. And the large houses up in front with the appropriate sized canoes, drawing out on the grass next to the houses, the one closer being a little bit larger, with an appropriate sized tree. Not only are the colors great, everything is where it should be to make sense of the shapes, but perspective is there. Perspective is there, and the man has never seen a shred of light a day in his life. I think that's absolutely amazing. Hearing. This sense is also complex, but more so in the way that the ear is set up. All right, so it goes through the labyrinth that is the human ear. Sound is funneled through the external ear and piped into the external auditory canal. Then sound waves reach the tympanic membrane or the eardrum. Okay, that's right here. All right, this is a thin sheet of connective tissue that vibrates when sound waves strike it. All right, it is possible to rupture the eardrum, not only due to loud noise, but poking it with something that you shouldn't be putting in your ear, like a Q-tip, or potentially getting a really bad infection that causes enough inflammation and swelling to rupture it. Vibrations then travel from that tympanic membrane to the middle ear. There, the auditory ossicles, which you learned about in the skeletal system, the three tiny bones called the malleus, the incus, and the stapes, vibrate. The stapes bone pushes a structure called the oval window in and out, sending vibrations to the organ of Corti, or otherwise known as the spiral organ of Corti. The spiral organ is the receptor organ for hearing. Tiny hair cells in the organ of Corti translate the vibrations into electrical impulses. Okay, just think about that for a minute. You have sound traveling in waves coming in, making your eardrum vibrate, all right, like beating a drum, which causes bones to hammer in on something else, and then little tiny hairs inside of the spinal organ convert all of that banging and vibration into electrical impulses that go to the brain via sensory nerves. And that is how you understand hearing. People retain their sense of balance because of the eustachian tube, all right, that is inside of your ear. In the middle ear, equalizes the air pressure in the middle ear with the air pressure in the atmosphere. The vestibular complex in the inner ear is also important for balance because it contains receptors that regulate a sense of equilibrium. The inner ear is connected to the vestibulocochlear nerve, which carries sound and equilibrium information to the brain. So it's different than just the cochlear nerve. This is the vestibulocochlear nerve. So this one handles both equilibrium and sound information to the brain. All right. One thing that's kind of cool, the reason that when you listen to a recording of yourself and you get disgusted sometimes because it doesn't sound like how you think it sounds. You think you sound lower, and then you hear the recording and you sound like Mickey Mouse talking. Um, when speech is being produced from within you, vibrations reach your eardrum, but not just from your mouth and then air vibrating and then coming into your ears. When your vocal cords make the noise, the vibrations travel up through your skull to reach your eardrums. As the waves move through the bone, they stretch out more to become lower in pitch. Combined with the external sound waves, the outcome is a voice with a slightly different tone than to what other people can hear. And I can tell you what I sound like on a recording versus what I sound like to myself just talking versus what I sound like to myself when I'm wearing something like this headset where I'm not hearing my voice as feedback. My hearing is muffled and I'm only getting my hearing through my bones is much lower in pitch than listening to myself talk without the headphones on, and definitely lower in pitch than what I hear on an actual recording. Now, I did include this image. It's pretty cool. This is how bone conduction headphones work. And I'm wondering if it does make things sound lower since you are conducting that sound through the bone rather than through an external means and listening to the actual sound waves. Bone conduction headphones transmit sound through the skull bones instead of the external ear canal. Smell. Smell is another complex system. Smell is an old system. Smell is part of our lizard brain and probably the least understood system in the human body in terms of your senses. We have 400 smelling receptors, but it has been recently discovered that humans don't smell just 10,000 things like we previously thought. Humans might be able to smell over 1 trillion scents, meaning that we are just as sensitive to smells as dogs are. This has to do with the olfactory cleft, which is found on the roof of the nasal cavity next to the quote unquote smelling part of the brain, the olfactory bulb, and the fossa. Nerve endings in the olfactory cleft transmit smells to the brain. All right. And here's a blown up image of that over here. It's pretty cool. Again, a pretty complex system happening here with an entanglement of various types of sensory nerves. All right. There is also something called anosmia or hyposmia. All right. This is a loss or a decrease in the sense of smell. All right. I'm sure we've all heard of if you get COVID-19, then, one of the symptoms is a loss of smell. It's also a symptom of aging sometimes or other medical conditions such as schizophrenia and depression. All right. When you are depressed, severely depressed, you have major depressive order or schizophrenia, you can literally start to lose your sense of smell. More than 75% of people over the age of 80 have major olfactory impairment. They are unable to smell things correctly. All right. Taste, which kind of goes along with smell, because smell helps you determine whether something is rotten, if it is acrid, something of that nature. So does taste. The gustatory sense is usually broken down into the perception of 4 different tastes, but we have added a fifth here. It's usually salty, sweet, sour, and bitter, but there's also a fifth taste defined as umami or savory. There may be many other flavors that have not yet been discovered and mapped on the human tongue. Also, spicy is not a taste. It is actually a pain signal. All right. You can sense bitter, but not spicy. Spicy is a pain signal. The sense of taste aided in human evolution. All right, because taste helps people test the food that you eat. A bitter or sour taste indicates that a plant might be poisonous or rotten. Something salty or sweet, however, usually means that the food is rich in nutrients. All right. This is the same with smell. It has also helped in human evolution. One fun fact about smell that I did not include is that humans can smell emotions, especially things like fear, although you do not know it. You pick up on that scent. It is very, very light. It doesn't really register in the brain. But when you can get a feeling if someone's really angry or really scared, you are actually picking that up in your olfactory bulb. All right, taste is sensed in the taste buds. Adults have 2,000 to 4,000 taste buds. Most of them are on the tongue, but they also have some at the lining of the back of the throat, the epiglottis, the nasal cavity, and the esophagus. Sensory cells on the buds form capsules shaped like little flower buds or oranges, and the tips of these capsules have pores that work like funnels with tiny taste hairs. Proteins on the hairs bind chemicals to the cells for tasting. So, again, this is a very complex thing, and also why smell is so entwined with taste. If you lose your sense of smell, you also lose a grand majority of your sense of taste. You are inhaling these chemicals in through your nose. There are taste buds in your nose, and you have hairs with proteins that bind to these chemicals to allow your brain to know, hey, chemically, this is what I'm smelling to allow you to perceive this thing as a smell. I'm sure you've heard of pheromones before, hormones that are being emitted, but not necessarily um, with a particular scent that you can smell. That may be the case in fear, anger, lust, all of these things that humans emit a pheromone that you can then pick up chemically with these little proteins on your little hairs that are in your taste buds. Again, there are taste buds in your actual nasal cavity. It is a myth that the tongue has specific zones for each flavor. The five tastes can be sensed on all parts of the tongue, although the sides are more sensitive than the middle. About half of the sensory cells and taste buds react to several of the five basic tastes, and the cells differ in their level of sensitivity. So you might have a zone that has more sensitivity to umami and a zone that's more sensitive to sweet, but that is not the only singular cell. So if you lose a part of your tongue, or burn your tongue, say in the entire sweet area of the map, you will still be able to taste sweet things because you can indeed taste them elsewhere as well. Each of these areas has a specific palette of taste with a fixed ranking. So some taste buds, some cells may be more sensitive to sweet, followed by bitter, sour, and salty, while others have their own rankings. The full experience of a flavor is produced only after all of the information from the different parts of the tongue is combined. Please, someone try convincing my children of this so they don't just lick something with the very tip of their tongue and think that they have tasted the thing. No, you have not experienced that vegetable. The other half of the sensory cells are specialized to react to only one taste. It is their job to transmit information about the intensity, how salty or how sweet something tastes. Other factors that help build the perception of taste in the brain, like the smell of the food, greatly affects how the brain perceives the taste. Smells are sent to the mouth in a process called olfactory referral. This is why someone with a stuffy nose that we just talked about might have trouble tasting food properly. Texture, which is also translated by the sense of touch, helps to contribute to taste. Medically known as glossitis, a burnt tongue is classed as a first-degree burn but quickly heals in a few days. Taste buds don't completely die when exposed to piping hot foods. When we scald the surface of our tongues, we remove the top layer of cells, including the upper layers of our taste buds. However, within the bundle of flavor detecting cells are stem cells known as basal cells, typically replacing the gustatory receptor cells every 10 days or so. These regenerative cells morph into replacement receptors quickly, restoring your taste. According to the Journal of the Italian Archives of Biology, 10% of cells are new taste buds each day. Um, this image I included for you is from Chinese medicine. If you're ever interested in getting acupuncture or something else, they will generally assess your health by looking at your tongue to determine what ailments you may have in the body. And they can see this by doing a diagnosis of the tongue. So if you want to pause this or look at the PDF, that image is there for you. I'm sure there's many others out there as well. Now, proprioception, the sense of space. In addition to the traditional big five, there is another sense that deals with how your brain understands where your body is in space. The sense is called proprioception. Proprioception includes the sense of movement and the position of our limbs and muscles. For example, proprioception enables a person to touch their finger to the tip of their nose. You know where your nose is, you know where your finger is in space, even with your eyes closed. All right. It enables a person to climb steps without looking at each one, and people with poor proprioception may be clumsy and uncoordinated. Researchers at the National Institute of Health, the NIH, that's one of my major go-tos for research, found that people who have poor proprioception through mechosensation, or mechanosensation, I should say, the ability to sense force, such as feeling when someone presses down on your skin, may have a mutated gene that is passed down from generation to generation. If you have someone that's having trouble feeling your massages, they have poor mechanosensation. All right. Their neurons cannot detect touch or limb movements. Neuron sensors sense movement to control balance. And this is sort of a diagram of how that works with mechanoreceptor neurons feeding the interneurons information, going to the motor neurons to then excite those effector organs or those muscles to do something in order to move. All right, there are more subtle senses that most people never really perceive. For example, there are neuron sensors that sense movement to control balance and the tilt of the head. There are kinesthetic receptors that exist for detecting stretching in muscles, all right? That goes along with your stretch reflex and tendons, helping people keep track of their limbs and where they are. We don't want to go crazy out of range of motion, do we? Other receptors detect levels of oxygen in certain arteries of the bloodstream. Sometimes people don't even perceive senses the same way. There is something called synesthesia, where people can see sounds as colors or associate certain sights with smells, for example. This is a pretty common chart of how the different tones in music also relate to particular colors. It's pretty cool. All right, that is all I have for you guys today. Have an excellent evening, and I will talk to you guys tomorrow when we jump on 3.4.